choosing operas for Pinchgut is a really fun thing to do, and it's also a little complicated. We chose Castor Pollux, Erin and I, because we wanted to do another French Baroque opera. We've done two so far. The first one was Rameau's Dardanus, which is a piece that I had discovered years ago through this weird old Saint-Saëns edition. And I fell in love with it and was looking for an opportunity to do it. So I did it in the States first and then with Erin, and then when we came out here and did a completely different sort of production. And our audience loved it. And the chorus loved it, the orchestra loved it. So we thought, well, let's try and go in a similar direction a couple of years later when we did David et Jonatas of Charpentier, which was a piece that was completely new to me that various people had recommended to me. And that was hugely successful, and so we thought, okay, after some more, some Haydn and some more Italian Baroque, let's get back to the French Baroque. And so we went through quite a lot of Rameau operas, and finally decided that Castor Pollux would actually be a piece that would work really well for the resources that we had, rather, and also we would be able to cast it really well from predominantly Australian singers. And it's a piece that was actually quite important in the development of opera. The funeral scene inspired Gluck to write his funeral scene in Orfeo, and it was one of the pieces that that Saint-Saëns was very fond of as well. And so that's why Castor Pollux has come about.
Antony and I have always loved Rameau. And for this year's production, we discussed quite a few Rameau productions. But in the end, we settled on Castor and Pollux in the 54 revival version for a number of reasons. Partly because this version is the version that people of the time understood to be Rameau's crowning achievement. And so it was really a coup de coeur for audiences of the time. And it also comes at a very interesting moment in history, a culture war, if you will, that went on in Paris in the 1750s. And we call it today the Guerre de Buffon, which means the War of the Comic Actors. Basically, at this point, it was a debate on the respective merits of Italian and French music. And the 54 revival version of Castor Pollux was understood to put an end to the increasingly empty debates. And so I teach it in my classes quite a bit to talk about how significant it is in the mid-century. And so it's a real delight for Pinchgut to put it on and for Antony and I to discover the score from the inside.
One of the most exciting things about presenting Rameau for me and for Erin is the orchestral texture and the orchestral palette that Rameau creates. With only 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, a trumpet, and string players, a big string band, and a harpsichord, of course, he manages to create such wonderfully varied, luscious, exciting textures in the orchestra. And the instruments are sort of playing with all the colours available to them. And Rameau is just such a master orchestrator. I particularly love it when he will use the 2 flutes with just a single violin line, and so you have this sort of velvety, beautiful, translucent line, in sort of very delicate passages, like for the Elysian Fields and things like that.
Editing Rameau's score was one of the toughest assignments I've ever had to face, actually. Partly because we chose the 54 version. There were a variety of sources. It took me a gazillion hours to put it all together. So in some respects, I feel like I kind of traced the work, just like an artist might go to a great gallery and then trace or copy a great master. I feel like I've traced every note that Rameau wrote. So it's very special for me to hear all the orchestra come together and play for the first time. It's actually really moving.
It's always a wonderful adventure entering into Rameau's orchestrational world and also his harmonic world, because there is an amazing, he's an extraordinary composer harmonically. He loves dissonances. And so not only there are chords, I'm going to be slightly dorky here for a second, not only chords with sevenths, but also ninths and every now and then 13ths. So you've got these almost like jazz chords built up. I know it doesn't quite sound that way, and especially in the interesting temperaments that he used at the time. But all these amazing sort of crunches and releases, just incredibly voluptuous, sort of sexy and also violent music. It's really odd to me that in Rameau's time, people thought he was a sort of dry academic. And I think that was partly because, well, the treatises that he wrote were certainly very dry and very academic. But also he was a sort of crusty old man by the time he started writing the operas. I mean, he started writing them when he was 50, which was old at the time. And he was a sort of person that, like Handel, people didn't really get to know very well. He was a little grumpy, a little antisocial, but all his imagination went into his music, and it just opens up incredible worlds.